Hello everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Compression Thinking series. My name is Ethan Berry and I'm joined by Robert Doc Hall, co-founder of the Compression Institute and professor emeritus at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. Doc's career started in engineering and manufacturing. His experience in these fields is what paved the way for his realization that current business models are contributing to the destruction of our planet. How do we get along without leaving too much of a mess? How do we adapt to a changing environment? Well, these are some of the questions Doc has been asking his entire career. This series is about how you can help to make a difference by making nature a stakeholder in your business or community. To do this, we need to change our values. But before we can do that, we need to change the way we think. If you enjoy this series, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Doing so helps us spread this program to more people and more communities who may benefit from the message. Now, you may be wondering what we mean when we use the word compression. Well, in the context of this podcast, compression is a reference to the squeeze we are putting on nature. To ease the compression of nature, we need to compress the way we live. Compression thinking is a guide to help us do just this, hopefully before it's too late. So how do you become a compression thinker? Well, you'll just have to keep listening to find out. Today, we're going to be discussing deep behavior. Doc, do you think compression thinking could possibly help us look at these issues collectively as well as individually from a clearer perspective?
Well, of course, and the problem is having large numbers of people come around to this kind of thinking. There are at least three major changes from today, and the problem we have is we're trying to think of something very different from the way business works today, still using the assumptions of that business model.
What are those assumptions?
Well, pick three areas. You can pick a bunch, but pick three areas. One is you're changing from a mentality of expansion, which the system insists on. And so you're changing from an expansion mentality. You always have to grow to be successful. That. To a compression mentality. No, you don't have to grow as a community or as a business to be successful. There's a second one, which is highly fragmented thinking. In business, we have market niches, or in the academic community, sometimes they're called Gothic spires, or inside companies are silos of thinking. It's fragmented. And so we have kind of single-point goals that we just drive toward. This kind of thinking says you need to integrate it. You need to integrate your thinking with your community and the world at large. And that leads to a third one, which is our success in the industrial era has come from dominating nature. We've gotten really good at it, and we've overshot.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's break these down point by point. The first one is, we need to transition from expansion to compression. Why do you think people aren't easily able to realize that continuous expansion is impossible?
Oh, it's because within the memory of most people, we've always thought that way. That's just how it is. And so we think that's how the world is. And so keep trying to interpret what we do with nature in business terms or with that logic, and it just doesn't work. And so we got to shift from thinking we got to grow and we got to dominate nature to we have to live with it and realize that we're symbiotic with it. That's the symbiotic thinking part of.
Yeah, and the second point you had was we need to stop thinking so fragmented and start to think more integrated. How does compression thinking kind of bridge this gap?
Well, the guidelines to the thinking, each one of them push you that way. And so how do you do it? I don't know any way other than just sort of get it in mind and practice. When you make any decision of consequence, can you consider the effects on nature with that decision?
To do that, one of the things you need to be conscious of, right, is the many feedback loops and systems that are operating within nature. You may not know all of them, but you can start off with what you do know, and you're going to learn more as you keep going through this, right?
Yeah, you never stop learning. You start when you're born and you don't quit until you can't breathe anymore because everything's always changing, so I can't learn as much as fast as I'd like to, and that's particularly true of some of the new social media kind of stuff. I can't keep up with that at all. But maybe that's not the important stuff to think about. It's what are we doing to the earth that's the important stuff to think about.
Given some of the estimates of, climate change, for example, it's going to impact the earth pretty severely, and it's going to put our place in nature kind of at risk. And a lot of the people talking about this are giving us a very short time to, turn around and kind of clean up our act. How do we get people to, feel that sense of urgency? Because right now they don't realize it, or maybe they're too intimidated by it. What do you think is going on there, Doc?
Well, we tend to block it out. This is, as we've mentioned, this is a pretty depressing message, and we don't like to be depressed. We have to be optimistic about something, or, we might have some kind of a mental illness of some kind. Depression, and clinical depression is one form of it. And so what we're attempting has not been done before at the speed or at the scale that it needs to happen, because usually people are sort of reactive in their learning. They learn by doing, which is great. They don't learn so much by trying to look ahead and then adjust their thinking, and that's just what they do. And so we're trying to do both of those at the same time. That's not been done. There are all kinds of techniques to be used for problem solving, but the intent of one of them, dialogue, kind of gets you into it.
Yeah, well, there's a concerted effort by some people to kind of deny the facts, and kind of moving parallel to that, there's also a good portion of the populace who are they're just misinformed, and they just don't know what they're talking about, especially when it comes to climate change. There's a lot of myths out there about that subject. And dialogue, coming together to speak about the issues, share perspectives, seems like one of the best, opportunities to kind of overcome some of that, don't you think?
Yes, if you can get people to engage in dialogue, which is the first challenge. Dialogue, by intent, is a behavioral adjustment approach. And if you can learn to talk together by a few fundamental rules of dialogue, it's a huge leap.
Well, normally we just want to, setting two people down to kind of discuss a topic when they have differing opinions, naturally they want to argue about it, don't they?
Sure. It's a good deal of what politics is about. You want to debate, now we can argue with each other. Pick out the winner. That's who you're going to vote for. That's the mentality. It doesn't necessarily address the problem. So let's talk a little bit about dialogue and a few basic rules. The key part of it is being aware going in that you are trying to self-govern. You're trying to take or understand a situation as it is, including people's conflicting beliefs about it, and work that out and get a direction to move forward. That ideally is what politics is about, and it's horribly inefficient doing it all too often. And so at the ultimate, you'll have a group that is a learning group, that people trust each other. Everybody can't know everything, but they'll use the group to put it together. So a few rules. Number one, most important, you're listening to learn. You're not listening to grab the next thing you can think of to refute somebody else. So you got your mind on it. The second one is, whatever the situation is, community, company, whatever, who are the stakeholders or what are the stakeholders? And nature's always a stakeholder. And so try your best to have all stakeholders represented in the exchange. A third one is speak up. When it's your turn, speak up. People speak in turns, and there's methods of doing that from old indigenous peoples, methods of passing the stick to, there's even a computerized method today called structured dialogic design. Don't worry. If you've got the behavioral basics of it down, the methodology just takes care of itself.
Point two there was getting all stakeholders in the community to come together for dialogue. Seems like that's going to be one of the biggest roadblocks, right? Getting people to put their differences aside to come together for dialogue.
Oh, yes. Yeah. You can only start where you can. Got to find a few people that can cross the divide just to get started. But it's realizing that would bring people together. It doesn't make out any difference how much money or prestige you've got if the life of mankind on Earth appears to be threatened for everybody, not just somebody that's, off Madagascar somewhere that you never heard of and right now don't care about. And once you're past that, people start to get on board.
Well, let's say that we've gotten past that. How do we apply these principles, guidelines, whatever you want to call them? How do we apply them to the community? What would the compression community look like as opposed to an expansion community?
Well, you're forming much more localized economies. If people are living closely together, they form more relationships than they frequently do now. I know some of the people in my community, but most of them are commuters. I know people all over the country better than I know people up and down the street.
Same here. In my apartment complex, probably a few hundred people living beside me. I don't know any of them.
Well, sometimes these are called intentional communities. Some intentional communities have kind of a common religion to them. Some of them are very environmentally oriented, and they will build or modify the housing to be more energy efficient. They may attempt to use only energy that they can capture from the sun right on site. In other words, be disconnected from the grid. They'll have common meals or grow common gardens. They're together a lot. And it's not exactly old village life before, say, the Industrial Revolution, but it's a direction something like that.
It seems like it's kind of tapping into a way of life that a lot of people crave today, Rates of depression are up, loneliness, reports of people feeling lonely, that's on the rise as well. And a lot of what people point to when they have this discussion oftentimes is diminishment of that sense of community, the connection to your neighbors. Within the intentional community, they're gonna look a lot different from communities today. One of those being is you call for new systems of governance, Doc. One of the things that jumps to my mind immediately when you say something like that is needs to be a bigger focus on, local leadership as opposed to, the decisions need to be made by the community.
Yeah, by a community and by maybe a number of communities at the level at which a situation can be addressed. Our political divisions have been sort of arbitrary. And so if you're talking about a problem with water that affects a whole watershed, well, we're not organized to do that. Can you set up governance so that you have local governance and then you have some council where you can all come together, at least in the United States, are actually voting for whoever put up the money to get their sorry rear elected, which means pushing the system of expansion as far as it can go. And changing that is huge. I don't think it'd be done without some kind of an uprising that says we've got to govern ourselves and live differently.
Back to the discussion about economies in the intentional community. We talk a lot about circular economies, Doc. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, well, our beginning industrial economy was pretty much take it from the ground, use it for a while, throw it away. So we came up with what's often called throwaway economy. And truly, pre-industrial economies were not that way. Got one academic colleague, now 30 years deceased, that said the most efficient tribes on earth were the nomads of the Sahara. They could do whatever they did, cross the desert, used everything, left not a trace. Whereas a highly advanced industrial economy had huge piles of garbage. And he'd classify them that way. You know, you could measure prosperity by how big the garbage pile was. That's what we have to get away from. And now a circular economy, you know, people sort of know recycle, reuse, remanufacture, get quality stuff and make it last a long time, share your tools, have a common garden, do everything so that the amount of energy used per capita is pretty low. Maybe it's back to where there's almost no external energy coming in other than what hits the ground and you can convert in some way. That was pre-industrial. And so getting back to where we have a very manageable amount of energy that we're putting into the ecology, and it can be encouraged to heal itself. That's a grand scheme of how these things actually work. And of course, there are a lot more of us now than there were 200 years ago, like 7-8 times as many. And you're not going to go back to living as an indigenous person did because the ecology won't let you do that. 8 billion people can't live the way a few million did when indigenous people thrived pretty much in harmony with nature. You got to figure out a different balance with nature that lets us coexist.
When your focus is on symbiosis with nature, you're shooting to maximize the well-being of the people, right? You're not focusing on profit, and that's kind of how we see things today. So if you're a business or if you're an individual and your focus isn't on profit, what is it on? How do you make a living?
Once you clear from your mind that you just have to have a business that takes in more money than it spends, you can begin to look at more things like relationships, and those have been thorns in the side of the current economy ever since I can remember. Or one of my favorites to talk to construction people about is, what was the business model of the people that built cathedrals? They didn't have a business model. At least not as we would think of today. They were building some big monument to God, and you can think about that however you wish. But it worked. And it isn't always necessary to have a business model that says you got to sell more and keep the cost down in order for the world to be a better place.
No, and that's one of the arguments a lot of people make for keeping this system as it is intact is because profit and money promotes hard work. It's like kind of like a carrot dangling at the end of the stick, you know what I mean? You work hard, you're going to get money, you're going to create an innovation that's going to benefit the rest of the society, and that's at least how the logic comes across to me.
Yeah, well, it comes across to me about the same way. And where's the fallacy at the end of that? Are you really better off than you were before?
No, but the cathedral is an example, it's one of many we could probably make that's not the case. What people are really pursuing, money is just the symbolic representation of it, right? It's that social prestige. It's that feeling that you did something for the people around you. And
what was that slogan back during the 90s, a political slogan? It's the economy stupid. Well, with this, it's more like it's the system stupid. Figure out how you can break your emotional and mental dependence on the way we think now.
And I think that's a good place to sign off, Doc. Before we wrap this up, do you have any final words for our audience?
Oh, no. Well, let's talk about teleconferences because we need to get into that. There's obviously way too much to talk about than we can cover here. So we're inviting people to teleconferences to join in this. Nobody has all the answers. They can't. Your ecology is different from my ecology. What you have to do and what I have to do aren't exactly the same things, even if they have some broad, general, similar theme. So maybe if we can help us, maybe if we can help you, you can also help us. We'll learn from you. And so how would you go about this with a situation you have where you are? That's what we'd like to know about.
And that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed listening to this, please feel free to join us in our weekly teleconferences where we discuss the problems you and your community are facing while trying to think of possible solutions. The problems we're up against are way too large for any one person to tackle on their own. It takes all of us coming together. These dialogue sessions happen every Tuesday. You can participate by calling the number provided on our webpage. Times, topics, and the number to call are all found under the Compression Thinking Series tab on our website, www.compression.org. Also, please do not forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If we're going to make a dent in some of the issues we discussed today, it will take all of us coming together, and your support helps. I know it feels as if we've merely scratched the surface of this topic, so if you're interested in learning more, you can check out Doc's many papers, videos, and book reviews at the same website, www.compression.org. Thanks for listening, everyone.